If it's Wednesday, sparks fly on Capitol Hill as House Republicans push forward with an impeachment inquiry into President Biden and his family's business dealings, despite a lack of hard evidence and new testimony contradicting their allegations of corruption. Plus, wins and warning signs in Ohio, where Donald Trump's pick for Senate easily won the Republican primary. It's the matchup Democrats wanted, setting up a high-stakes general election that could be key to the control of the Senate. Plus, President Biden hits the campaign trail in battleground states, touting his economic agenda today in Arizona, one day after telling Hispanic voters in Nevada that Trump, quote, despises Latinos. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yami Shalcendor in Washington, where House Republicans are pressing on with their impeachment inquiry into President Biden, despite mounting legal and political setbacks. Here's a live look at Capitol Hill, where the House Oversight Committee's all-day hearing that's part of the impeachment inquiry is ongoing. It's not clear where House Republicans take their investigation now, after this chaotic hearing showcased the many problems facing the inquiry. Perhaps the most significant problem is a lack of hard evidence tying President Biden and his sons to his business dealings. It's the heart of the inquiry, and yet in the hearing today, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer held up vague interactions as proof of corruption.
Because in the course of this investigation, we have learned that Joe Biden has taken action after action to further his family's plans to get rich. He shows up to meetings, gets on phone calls, shakes hands, and tells people to, quote, look after my family.
Another major problem facing House Republicans, credibility. Today, Democrats criticized one of the Republican witnesses on his ties to Donald Trump. And the other Republican witness testified from prison, where he's serving a 14-year prison sentence for an unrelated fraud conviction. The Democratic witness was a convicted felon, too, Lev Parnas. He is a former associate of Rudy Giuliani, who was part of the Trump team's efforts to dig up dirt on candidate Joe Biden. Parnas told lawmakers that the impeachment inquiry was a result of Russian propaganda.
Today, I ask you to consider the following. In nearly a year traveling the world and interviewing officials in different countries, I found precisely zero evidence of the Biden's corruption in Ukraine. No credible source has ever provided proof of criminal activity. The only information ever pushed on the Bidens in Ukraine has come from one source, and one source only: Russia and Russian agents. The impeachment proceedings that bring us here now are predicated on false information spread by the Kremlin.
Without hard evidence and with partisan tempers flaring, the hearing today devolved into political theater, including an empty witness seat for Hunter Biden, who declined to testify publicly, despite testifying in a closed-door deposition last month that his father had nothing to do with his business deals. Also at today's hearing, plenty of shouting and partisan bickering. Plus, Democrat Jared Moskowitz wore a Vladimir Putin mask as he entered the hearing. We are now more than 6 months into this impeachment inquiry with no clear sign of what the actual charges are or when an impeachment vote could happen. We also don't know if Republicans even have enough votes to support it. With Election Day less than 8 months from now, Republicans are at a crossroads. Where does this investigation go now? NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins me now. Also with me, NBC News senior investigative producer Sarah Fitzpatrick. Thank you both for being here. So, Ryan, did they set out to really accomplish a number of goals, and did they actually accomplish those goals? And what's the sense of how this went today?
I mean, Yamisha, if you're somebody that's paid even a modicum of attention to the House impeachment inquiry into President Biden, you heard a lot of the same things you've heard over and over and over again. There wasn't a ton of new ground covered today, even though I say that with the caveat that the impeachment inquiry is still ongoing. Republicans continue to present this theory that they believe that Joe Biden was directly involved in his son's business dealings. They point to a very small number of interactions that the president may or may not have had with the business associates of Hunter Biden. But in most of these instances, they never really talked about business, or no promises were made, or no exchange of money was ever made. And so while they have smoke, they still have yet to deliver that fire. If they were hoping or believing under the assumption that today they would be able to deliver that fire, it seems as though they fell short. And then you have the added component of Democrats presenting Lev Parnas as kind of a counterbalance to all of this, as somebody who worked for Donald Trump with the specific goal of trying to find dirt on Joe Biden and his family, and testifying under oath today that he found none. Yamiche.
In this hearing, as you said, a lot of smoke, no fire just yet, but it's still ongoing. So, Sarah, did we learn anything from today's hearing, anything new?
I think we learned two things, Amish. One is that despite Ryan's excellent reporting that behind the scenes, House Republicans are really increasingly skeptical of this impeachment investigation. Today, the members of Congress really doubled down on their claims, but they weren't able still today to demonstrate any evidence of wrongdoing, much less a crime. I was most interested, though, today in Lev Parnas' testimony. He was very emphatic about allegations that Rudy Giuliani knew at the time that information they received as part of their efforts to find dirt on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, that they knew his allegations was that they knew at the time that they were coming from Russian assets acting on behalf of Putin and the Kremlin. Those are explosive allegations, and I think the significance today is that he made them under oath. And he also drew the line that this impeachment inquiry itself is a result of an ongoing Russian misinformation campaign. Republicans didn't really engage with those allegations in any substantive way, which I think is really interesting.
And Sarah, could you just remind us who Lev Parnas is? I know there have been so many names in this Trump inner circle that have testified now. Tell us about Lev Parnas.
Lev is a fascinating character, and he's found himself at the center of now two separate impeachment inquiries for two separate presidents. Parnas is a Ukrainian-American businessman. He's an American citizen, and he worked closely with Giuliani in 2018 and 2019 to try and find damaging information on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden overseas, and then worked, he says, to spread it to Congress and to Fox News and to others. And it was in the middle of those efforts in October 2019 that he was arrested on wire fraud and campaign finance violations. He was convicted. He spent time in prison. And today, it was really interesting. He said that he now looks at his time with Giuliani and other Trump allies as being part of a cult, and that he deeply regrets that work. And he hopes that coming clean to the American public will educate everyone once and for all.
It was striking to say that he felt like he was brainwashed and was part of this cult. But Ryan, I want to go to you. There's this idea that, of course, this has been going on for 6 months. Where is the impeachment inquiry head now? Do Republicans even have an off-ramp if they wanted one?
Yeah. I don't have the shrug emoji to share with you right now. You're being on television, so I'll just do it. I don't know where the impeachment inquiry goes next. House Republicans have really not forecasted what comes next. This is the only real thing that's on their calendar. I think most of them admit that all the major depositions have already taken place. All the interviews that they want to conduct have taken place. I think the big question is if there will ever be a vote. And there was a moment during this hearing today where Jared Moskowitz of Florida, who you showed walking in with a Vladimir Putin mask, specifically asked James Comer, when will we have a vote on this? Almost daring him to put it on the floor. And the argument that he was making that if they had the goods, if they had enough evidence that Joe Biden was guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, this vote would have already taken place a long time ago. So the exit ramp question that you ask is an important one, because I don't ever think there's going to be a scenario where Speaker Mike Johnson or James Comer or Jim Jordan stand up and say, we declare the impeachment inquiry over and we've decided not to move forward. That would amount to an exoneration of Joe Biden. That's nothing that they even want to entertain during an election year. So we're going to probably just see them drag this out over the next couple of months. There is the possibility, and Comer has floated the idea of offering up criminal referrals to the Department of Justice based on some of the evidence that they've uncovered as part of their investigation, which would put Attorney General Merrick Garland in a difficult position. But as it stands right now, it is an open question as to what comes next with this impeachment inquiry.
Well, another big open question, Ryan, is Hunter Biden and whether or not he will testify publicly. We know that he testified during a closed-door deposition. Is there any chance that we'll see the president's son testify publicly? I know his lawyers have been blasting this, but could we see him on camera in front of America?
So I'm highly skeptical that it's ever going to happen, and I think Sarah feels the same way for a lot of reasons. I actually think this is one of these scenarios where both Hunter Biden and his legal team and House Republicans keep telling us they want a public hearing to happen, but in reality, I doubt that either of them are all that motivated to make it happen. One of the reasons I would point to that kind of backs up that assumption is that this hearing that took place today was by invitation. It was not by subpoena. So it was easy for Hunter Biden to back out of it without any kind of legal recourse. Remember, he was on the verge of being held in contempt of Congress for not sitting for that closed-door deposition. They did not put the same level of pressure on him this time around. I think the general consensus was that Hunter Biden performed pretty well in the closed-door deposition. If he were to go in front of the cameras, it would be a high risk not only to Republicans if he performs well, but also to him specifically because he still has legal exposure here because he is, of course, still under indictment, and anything he says in a public hearing could be used in a court case. So my guess is it's never going to happen, but Yamiche, I probably shouldn't be in the business of predicting Congress because they always prove me wrong, but we'll have to see. At this point, I'm highly skeptical that it will happen.
Well, we'll, of course, keep our eye on it. Thank you so much, Ryan and Sarah. And if you needed more proof that the Republican Party is the party of Trump, we got it last night in the Ohio Senate primary race. Trump-backed candidate Bernie Moreno ran away with it last night. He won every single county and even cracked 50%. The second-place finisher, Matt Dolan, chalked it up to Trump.
It's self-evident that Donald Trump's endorsement of Bernie Moreno was the key factor for Bernie winning. Again, I think Trump's endorsement was very influential in the race.
Digging into the exit polls, Trump's strength is very apparent. 73% of Ohio Republican voters said it is more important for the state's next senator to show support for the former president. Moreno won a majority of those voters, and 2/3 believe the false notion that President Biden did not legitimately win the 2020 election. Moreno also cleared up with those voters, too. While Moreno had Trump's endorsement, he also is the candidate Democrats most wanted to win. They think he is most beatable in November, which sounds a little familiar. Moreno's win sets up a race with incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown that could decide which party controls the Senate. Joining me now for more on why last night's results matter for November is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. So, of course, you've written a number of articles that have solidified this is Trump's party. But I wonder, what did we learn in Ohio yesterday that solidifies that even more?
I think it's the fact that how persuasive Trump is at the end. I mean, this isn't, look, the Trump voter was waiting for Trump again in some ways, right? You had Bernie Moreno was dealing with something from his past that could have been, that was being used, a question about some sort of dating site, may have been a same-sex dating site or something like that. And they were almost waiting. It was as if they were waiting for Trump to bless him again. And he comes in that rally, and it clearly had an impact. I mean, these are good pollsters that are involved. This was a race. This broke late. Moreno got the rest. I'm moved by one of the people who interviewed somebody after the polls, and I voted for the guy Trump wanted. Like, couldn't even remember the guy's Moreno's name after they voted for him. So it really does show you the power of Trump in these primaries. But he had a lot of power in 2022, too, and he ended up helping nominate a bunch of people who are more vulnerable. Democrats also made a huge assist here to Moreno at the end because they were petrified. Look, if Matt Dolan had won this primary, I'm not saying Democrats would have pulled out of Ohio Senate race because Sherrod Brown's too beloved inside the party to do that. But I promise you, there'd have been if you were deciding who got more resources, John Tester was going to get all, This Moreno being the nominee means Democrats are going to stay engaged all the way to the end.
And Chuck, of course, I know you always love sort of the political trivia. When we look at Ohio, Sherrod Brown is in this very unique space because Trump has won Ohio twice, 2016 and 2020, but still they have a Democratic senator. So how much is Senator Brown going to have to really pull those split ticket voters to win again?
He's got to win. Look, Biden lost it by 8. Tim Ryan lost to J.D. Vance by 6. So you sort of see where it is there, right? Can Sherrod Brown run 3 or 4 points ahead of Joe Biden? I think he can. Can he run 6, 7, 8 points ahead of Joe Biden? I think that's a very, very tall order. We're going to find out in a presidential year. It's interesting. Sherrod Brown has won this seat 3 times. Only once was it in a presidential year, and Barack Obama carried Ohio. That was when Ohio was, in 2012. So this is a different Ohio than the last time he ran in a presidential year. And there's something about it's interesting how the two parties have flipped. It used to be Democrats benefited from sort of a presidential vote turnout surge, and now it is clearly on the Trump side of things. He benefits more, Republicans benefit more from this sort of the last people that end up turning out.
I also want to talk about your new column out. You write about that there are two kinds of voters. They're aspirationalists.
That are left.
that are left. Aspirationalists and transactionalists. I want to read a little bit of what you wrote. You wrote, some voters will respond to aspirational appeals about what's in the best interest of America abroad and what's in the best interest of the country as a whole. Others will be persuaded to rationalize their votes based on pure transactional feelings. Explain your thesis here in these two voters.
Look, this primarily comes from watching the business community of late, particularly in the tech world, right? You've seen this sort of, and you know, the tech world really has transitioned from a very idealistic set of founders back in the late first decade of this century to a very dark, you know, sort of, hey, it's survival of the fittest mindset, you know, and this sort of transactional nature that politics, yeah, Trump's corrupt, but they're all corrupt. The whole system's corrupt. Maybe I don't even have to bother. And it's this cynical, I think that I point out these voters, I've been running across them a lot more, even in person, these people that don't like either candidate, don't like either party, and then just say, well, you know, at least with Trump, you can buy him off. And they almost see that as a net positive because it's at least he's persuadable in that sense. And it's this sort of, frankly, dark view of the American public, right? And dark view of democracy in general. So I think this is something Biden's running up against. He's comfortable trying to be aspirational. It was easier for him to do this in 2020. It's hard to do it as a sitting president, but he's going to need it because I think the biggest thing he's facing are a bunch of voters who don't like Trump who may not vote, and that could be the difference of him winning or losing.
Well, in this double haters sort of atmosphere.
These are the double haters.
In the double haters atmosphere, what are you watching for when you think about the fact that Biden won these voters last time, but this time around it's going to be harder? I think
these folks. Let me put it this way. When you had in college, when you had a paper due, and I don't want to presume, and you weren't looking forward to this paper, did you do it early or did you do it late? And I think one thing that I want to warn people of is I think it's possible we're very static. The double haters they're not going to break until Halloween, okay? Like, I think we are looking at late breaking voters here. So because I think if you don't like a decision you have to make, you're going to wait till the very last minute to make it. Yeah.
I also want to ask you, there's this idea you noted in your column that Mike Pence, because I want to bring this up.
I think it's the biggest thing that happened last week, and we haven't paid attention to it.
It's really interesting because in any other election, any other political cycle, you would think the vice president not endorsing the president that he was with would be big news. Tell me a bit about
I still think this is a big deal.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about why you think it should get more attention.
I go back to the double haters, right? At the end of the day, it's the double haters that are going to decide this election. They decided it in 16. They're going to decide it in 24. They decided it in 20. They'll decide it in 24. The fact that, I don't know whether it'll be a super PAC that runs this ad, the Lincoln Project, whoever it is, but you're going to have, at the end of this campaign, an ad that says, don't take Joe Biden's word that Donald Trump's unfit for president. Take it from the people he hired, and then you play a clip of him saying, I only hire the best people, right? And then you have Mike Pence, 2 secretaries of defense, Jim Mattis and Mark Esper, 2 former chiefs of staff, John Kelly and Mick Mulvaney, 2 national security advisors, H.R. McMaster and John Bolton. That's all of them are much more credible messengers to the double haters than Joe Biden will be. And I think that's why I think the fact that Pence was that comfortable, you don't even have to use Liz Cheney, but you have a growing list in the Senate. There's going to be at least, I think, 5 Republican senators that sit I'm not endorsing it, right? It looks like Tom Tillis is going to be there. Todd Young's already. That's not an insignificant list because, you don't have a mirror image on the Democratic side. There is not Dean Phillips, and even he's endorsing Biden.
Well, I want to ask you more questions, but we have to go. So thank you so much, Chuck Todd. I appreciate it.
Got it.
And coming up, former President Trump, who has avoided staking out a clear position on abortion, is now signaling he would support a 15-week national abortion ban. Those comments ahead. Plus, confusion and controversy in Texas as the law allowing local officials to arrest and deport migrants is now back on hold and back in the court. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. A controversial Texas immigration law has been temporarily blocked yet again. A federal appeals court ordered it to be paused just hours after the Supreme Court said it could go into effect. That same appeals court appeared skeptical of the Texas law during arguments earlier today, as it considered whether the law could go into effect while its constitutionality is being challenged. The appeals court has yet to issue a ruling. The law would give Texas authorities the power to arrest, detain, and deport migrants suspected of crossing the border illegally. The Biden administration argues the federal government has the sole authority over immigration. It all comes as immigration is expected to be a dominant part of the conversation in 2024, and as the Biden campaign is focusing on re-engaging Latino voters. During an interview with Univision Radio yesterday, President Biden went after his 2024 rival's incendiary rhetoric on the issue of immigration.
Here's what he said about immigrants: poisoning the blood of the country. He separated kids and parents at the border and he caged the children. He's planning mass deportations of literally several million people who are here in the country. Several million people. And he wants to end birthright citizenship. You know, this guy despises Latinos.
We'll be going to our White House correspondent in just a moment with some of the biggest questions facing Donald Trump. But one of the biggest questions facing Donald Trump right now is his position on abortion. Yesterday, we got a potentially big clue when he spoke favorably about supporting a national ban on the procedure at 15 weeks. Take a listen.
The number of weeks now, people are agreeing on 15, and I'm thinking in terms of that, and it'll come out to something that's very reasonable. But people are really, even hardliners are agreeing. Seems to be 15 weeks, seems to be a number that people are agreeing at. But I'll make that announcement at the appropriate time. But the issue of abortion, we brought it back to the states, and everybody agrees that you've heard this for years. All the legal scholars on both sides agree it's a state issue. Shouldn't be a federal issue. It's a state issue.
But while he signaled support for a 15-week federal ban, former President Trump also emphasized his view that abortion is a state issue, not a federal one. It comes as Republicans are facing renewed attacks from Democrats on the issue of reproductive rights. That is following last month's controversial ruling by Alabama's Supreme Court that frozen embryos are people, which led to pauses in IVF treatment in that state. Joining me now is Florida Republican Congresswoman Paulina Luna. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
So President Biden has suggested that he's open to supporting a national 15-week abortion ban. He's also said abortion is a state issue. Congresswoman, do you know where he stands on the issue of abortion?
Are we talking about Biden or Trump? Because right now, what I can tell you is that it should be up to the states to choose. I am personally pro-life, but that is a states' rights issue.
I'm talking about Trump.
Okay, yeah, I can tell you that right now he said that, again, this is a states' right issue. And so I haven't spoken to him personally about that. But again, it's not the job of the federal government to be legislating on that topic. Again, state rights issue.
Would you support a federal, I know you're saying it's a state rights issue, but would you support a federal ban on 15 weeks of abortion? If you couldn't get an abortion after 15 weeks, would that be something you could get behind on a federal level?
I share an absolute, I think, general consensus with my colleagues that, again, that's a states' rights issue, so we're not to interfere on that. But what I can tell you is on the issue of life and in supporting pro-life legislation, Republicans have been very strong on that. I just introduced legislation. I have my colleagues, Representative Brandon Williams, in addition to potentially Representative Nancy Mace, that will be championing that effort. And as you heard from President Trump, that is a states' rights issue. The federal government should be interfering.
You just mentioned the bill that you introduced to protect IVF. What exactly is in your bill, and how is it different than the bill that Democrats are backing?
Yeah, in fact, I was actually approached by a number of Democrats, and previously in the NDAA, we actually did also from our office back something that would enable military members to have more easier access to IVF because of the fact that there are environmental factors that are impacting this. But what I can tell you is that my bill is different in the fact that you have to have a medical diagnosis and would actually protect doctors from actually performing that procedure. And again, I really want to specify that there's a massive difference between abortion and IVF. I think that the conversation needs to be held in a respectful fashion. And I do have family members that have actually gone through with successful childbirth because of IVF. And so I think that as a pro-life individual, as a member of Congress, that if these states are going to have access to certain grant funding that actually benefit motherhood programs in their state, that they need to ensure that they are enabling access to all individuals individuals to become mothers, especially those that are suffering from medical conditions.
Well, with what you're saying about IVF, I want to play for you what Speaker Johnson had to say about IVF legislation earlier this month. Take a listen.
It's not my belief that Congress needs to play a role here. I think this is being handled by the states. We need to do it ethically and well, and I think the states are handling that well. But it's something that we should protect access to, and I think every Republican is committed to that idea.
So there you have the Speaker saying he does not think Congress should take this up. Do you disagree with his stance, and should he be prioritizing IVF legislation in Congress?
I would hope that he would consider bringing our legislation to the floor, and I want to just back up the Speaker in saying that, again, my actual legislation would basically look at this from the power of the purse perspective, which is exactly what Congress is supposed to be doing, and saying that if you are a state that wants to ban IVF, ban people from having beautiful families, which is exactly what IVF does, then you're not going to be able to get federal dollars for certain programs that you're going to use to benefit your state, and that's exactly what we're hoping to do. I want to also be clear in that a majority of people are not going to tell you that they're suffering from fertility issues. There's a population decline, and there's also a lowering in fertility rates in this country. And so I hope that both Hakeem Jeffries and Speaker Johnson consider bringing this to the floor. But, you know, I'm not one that usually plays by your typical rules. So in the event that they decide not to, I'm going to be doing a discharge petition on that matter. And I hope both Democrats and Republicans join me in protecting this.
We also want to turn really quickly to your work on the House Oversight Committee. We've now heard from Hunter Biden and his business associates. Are there enough votes right now for an impeachment to go forward? Do Republicans have enough to support that?
Unfortunately, in the Senate, I don't think that it's going to go forward. However, I want to be clear about something. You know, as Congress, as Senate, we're not the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and we're not by any means a punitive arm. So what I will tell you is that these investigations are for the American people to decide. But I also want to remind people that I do believe that this Republican body needs to be serious about contempt of Congress proceedings. And so I'm going to be encouraging the Speaker as well as Chairman Comer to issue a subpoena for Hunter Biden. Hunter, if you don't show up, guess what? You're going to be held in contempt.
Congresswoman, I just want to be clear. I was asking you if Republicans in the House and that oversight committee, what you're sitting on, do Republicans in the House have the votes to impeach President Biden, or at least have the votes to support it?
Well, we already had a vote on that, and it was successfully passed. And I think with the fact that we have a one-seat majority, if we were to bring that back up, I believe that since Ken Buck has left, we likely have those votes, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman, for your time. I know you've got to get back to the oversight hearing, so that's still ongoing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Support IVF.
You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned moments ago, President Biden has hit the road on a battleground state swing through Nevada and Arizona as he ramps up criticisms of former President Trump. Joining me now is Monica Alba outside the White House. Monica, thanks for being here. So President Biden has been in Nevada and in Arizona so far. I know there's some sirens behind you, but hopefully you can hear me. He's making a concerted effort, President Biden, to really go after Latino voters. He said he's claiming that Trump, quote, despises Latinos. What's driving this push in this moment right now? And how is Biden and the campaign making sure that they're not treating Latino voters as a monolith?
No, and that's absolutely key, Yamiche. And really what the Biden campaign is trying to do is reactivate portions of the electorate that were key to his success in 2020 and hoping that they are going to be by his side once more in 2024. And the president really put it in very plain terms yesterday, saying, you, to Latinos who were there at an event with him, are the reason that I was able to defeat Donald Trump when I did, and I need you again if we're going to repeat that. And he really put this in the context of some of the things he says he's been able to do throughout his administration when it comes to lowering Hispanic unemployment to record levels, for instance, and everything else that they're arguing they're trying to do when it comes to the economy and things that are lowering costs for people when it comes to housing, when it comes to health care, and other issues and areas that they think will be appealing to Latino voters in various states. But of course, it might come down to some of those critical battlegrounds like in Arizona, like in Nevada. And that is why the campaign and the entire re-election effort had a whole push to launch specifically their Latinos con Biden and Harris initiative yesterday, which includes a lot of bilingual ads. It includes a lot of people who are working for the campaign, who are doing outreach in a bilingual fashion and, in their view, really meeting voters where they are and in the language that they speak or in the Spanglish that they speak. Yamiche.
Well, as you mentioned, Arizona, the president, of course, was there today touting a massive $8.5 billion grant to Intel for chip production. And to talk about other chip subsidies, those chips being, of course, the things that power our computers, smartphones, cars. So what more do we know about these grants, and how does it really play into the overall push by the administration to talk about their economic message, especially as people are saying the numbers might look good, but my life and the actual lived experience around me, that's not really feeling any better?
Exactly. The whole vibe session, where even if the numbers say one thing, people really are feeling something different. And what you feel is likely sometimes what drives you to make your decisions at the ballot box. So the Biden campaign and the White House are keenly aware of that. So they're trying to really crystallize for people. Here is where we have actually been able to make real differences. Here is our job creation. They were talking about this Intel plant and others that are going to be opening over the coming months, and they hope years, if this can continue, to really provide all of these new key jobs and reinvigorate the economy in certain places. And you're going to be seeing the president going around and trying to marry what he sees as his legislative accomplishments with, here's my vision for what 4 more years in office could do, and I can build upon this if you reelect me. So we're really coming to the point where he's using all of his official White House travel and events to complement his campaign message. And really, for many people who are consuming that, they may not really see the difference between the two, and that is what they are sort of hoping for. The Biden folks and aides want people to just take a look at an event like today and say, oh, that is something that may make a difference in my community, and that is why I might support Joe Biden. But as we know, that message isn't always getting through, and it's not something that people feel as acutely, but the Biden team thinks that there is a bit of a lag in that, and maybe a couple of months from now, they will. Yamiche.
And you talk about the future. How much more might we see the president out on the campaign trail doing what he's doing today?
I think a lot, and I think this was really what they billed as a March month of action after the State of the Union. They said they were going to really blanket every single battleground state, and that is what he and the vice president have done over the last 10 days or so, and there will be additional stops next week. We know the two of them will be together in North Carolina, so you're going to see them really hit everything that we consider critical for November, but you're certainly going to see that kind of travel continue and likely ramp up as well.
Thank you so much, Monica Alba from the White House. Turning now to the other candidate in the race for the White House, Donald Trump, and the largely unknown political operative at the top of his campaign. Susie Wiles is among a handful of advisors that make up Trump's inner circle right now, working behind the scenes to help the former president win back the White House. NBC's Garrett Haake has more.
When Donald Trump took the stage at his Super Tuesday victory party, he thanked just 2 staffers by name.
Susie, Chris, incredible job. Incredible job you're doing. I read an article yesterday where it said this is one of the finest run campaigns that anybody has ever seen.
Susie is Susie Wiles, Trump's enigmatic top aide, who has never done a television interview about her role in the former president's campaign. Chris is senior advisor Chris LaCivita.
Susie definitely is probably not only the most interesting, but the most powerful woman in Republican politics right now.
Wiles, a 40-year veteran of Republican politics, cut her teeth working for Congressman Jack Kemp. Her first role with Donald Trump was as the co-chair of his 2016 Florida campaign, a state where she had become well known in political circles for engineering Rick Scott's razor-thin 2010 victory in the governor's race.
She's a good listener. She's humble. She doesn't say, hey, I know all the answers.
How important do you think those qualities are in working with Donald Trump?
I think they're pretty important.
Wiles next took over the struggling 2018 gubernatorial campaign of Ron DeSantis, for whom Florida firebrand Matt Gaetz was a senior advisor.
What do people get wrong about her? Well, Susie Wiles is ruthlessly effective. She has the exterior of a kind grandmother, but she knows everything going on in all the campaigns she's involved in.
But the infamously insular DeSantis forced Wiles out of his orbit in 2019. And by 2020, she was helping Mr. Trump win Florida a second time.
I stand before you to officially launch my campaign for a second term as President of the United States.
As the de facto campaign manager of Trump 2024, Wiles has created a largely leak and drama-free campaign operation where the candidate creates the headlines, for better or worse.
But one thing that Susie doesn't do, she doesn't manage the candidate. She's going to allow Trump to be Trump, and she's not there to control him or stifle him. She's there to make sure that the energy created by President Trump is reflected in an operationally competent campaign.
About Wiles' own political belief, sources say little. She's an environmentalist, one offered. And on the criticism that a longtime establishment figure who once worked in the Reagan White House and later ran John Huntsman's presidential campaign is now leading Donald Trump's, friends of mine from the old days scratch their heads, but I don't care, Wiles told NBC News. I'm quite sure that we are on a mission, and we're going to complete it.
And Garrett Haake joins me now. So, Garrett, this was a great piece on someone that a lot of people don't know really exists and is doing a lot of the work here. So how much harder, though, is Susie Wiles' job going to be, even though, as your piece said, she's going to let Trump be Trump?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's not going to be a pivot here. We've talked about this quite often. So she's not going to try to change Donald Trump. I think her biggest challenge now is scaling up and trying to turn what has been a very successful state-by-state primary campaign into a proper national campaign. But I'm not a big believer in doing staff stories in general unless they really tell you something about the candidate. And I think the way in which Susie Wiles has run this campaign has told us something about Donald Trump. This is somebody who's gone through 10 or so different either chiefs of staff or campaign managers during his political career, all of whom have either tried to want a little bit of the spotlight for themselves or to try to change or shape him in some way. She does not do that. And here you have this Trump machine where, as I say in the piece, the drama and the headlines, and there's still plenty of drama and headlines, they're just coming from the candidate. That's the way Trump likes it. I think that's what we're going to continue to see.
And a big part of the campaign is going to be, of course, juggling his legal issues. We learned today that the Fulton County judge is allowing Trump and his co-defendants to move forward with an appeal of his ruling that kept DA Fani Willis off of the case, or she's now going to be on the case, I should say, rather. What does this mean for Trump that you have this appeal being able to go forward? But Fani Willis is still on this case. She's still allowed to go forward after, of course, Nathan Wade resigned.
This is the case that's probably always had the greatest long-term risk for Donald Trump, but perhaps the least short-term risk. It was very unlikely to go to trial before the election anyway. It's probably less likely to go to trial now than it has been after this entire episode with Fani Willis and with Nathan Wade. I do think now the possibility of an appeal here suggests a little bit more of a timing lifeline for Donald Trump. The legal analysis that I have seen, and I am not a lawyer, despite how much we talk about these cases on TV, doesn't suggest that this will get overturned on appeal. But even that process could continue to provide delay, which has been a lifeline for Donald Trump in so many ways.
I mean, the other thing we have to talk about is money. There's this big issue with the fact that there's $460 million. I got to read it because it's such big. This bond coming up for former President Trump. What happens if he doesn't have this bond, the money for this bond, and can't come up with this bond? And what does that mean for the overall sort of functioning of his campaign going forward?
Yeah, look, an unusual position for a billionaire candidate and a former president to basically need money on every front. His campaign is cash-strapped right now. They're very focused on fundraising for the campaign. He also needs this money personally for these legal challenges here. He's up against a bit of a wall here. If he doesn't come up with his bond by Monday, the state of New York could start trying to seize his assets. Now, I've talked to people in Trump's orbit who say, great, let them show up and try to, change the locks at Trump Tower. It would be rocket fuel for his campaign. In a filing today, the AG's office suggested that perhaps some of his properties could be held in escrow by the court as a kind of a middle ground here. Trump has been very resistant to the idea that he could declare bankruptcy or sell properties in kind of a forced fire sale. They don't want to go through that, but they're running out of time to come up with some kind of plan.
Well, I know you're not a lawyer, but you really play a really good one on TV.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, Garrett. And after the break, as Democrats ramp up their criticisms, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses Senate Republicans. We're live on Capitol Hill with the details next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The rift between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is spilling over into Congress. This afternoon, Netanyahu appeared virtually at the Senate Republican conference lunch. He's looking to shore up their support, telling those lawmakers Israel is going to, quote, finish the job. That comes less than a week after Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer offered his sharpest criticisms of Netanyahu to date, calling for new elections in Israel. According to two U.S. officials in their phone call earlier this week, President Biden reassured Netanyahu that the White House was not looking to oust him from power. But the president did press Netanyahu to come up with an alternative plan to avoid a large-scale military operation in southern Gaza. The president is concerned it could significantly worsen the humanitarian crisis facing Palestinian civilians. Joining me now is Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill. So, Ali, thanks for being here. So what was Benjamin Netanyahu's message to Senate Republicans today? And does he feel like he needed to shore them up? And because of all this tension that's going on, at least being reported on with President Biden?
Well, look, certainly it was a moment of shoring things up, although this is something that had been previously scheduled and then forcibly rescheduled to this week. But it, of course, comes against the backdrop of the comments that Senator Schumer had made in the past, criticizing Netanyahu's leadership in Israel, and then the condemnation that we've seen from Republicans, including his counterpart, Mitch McConnell, on the Republican side, saying that Schumer is basically meddling in affairs that he shouldn't be meddling in. Now, Schumer was offered the same kind of appearance by Netanyahu that Republicans were offered. He declined, saying that these conversations aren't things that should be done by partisan bases. Nevertheless, Republicans, of course, hearing from Netanyahu today, and he was saying that Israel needs to finish the job in regards to Hamas and the ongoing situation in Palestine.
And Ali, you mentioned those comments. We should remind people, of course, President Trump said that Jewish Americans who support Democrats hate their religion and hate Israel. So how are lawmakers up there on Capitol Hill, how are they reacting to former President Trump's comments?
Yet another in a string of controversial comments from Trump, both on Israel and writ large. Of course, this is probably not going to be the last time that we're asking lawmakers on the Hill for comment on something that Trump said. And while there was a range of reactions from Republican and Democratic lawmakers alike, most Republicans are basically sticking up for the former president. Watch.
I don't speak for President Trump, but I understand the sentiment that he's trying to express. I think you see the House Republicans and the Republican Party at large, and President Trump, for that matter, standing strong with Israel, and you see an increasingly large number of Democrats and a big faction of the Democratic Party who are standing against Israel openly.
I think that, if you're a Jewish voter in this country and you typically vote Democrat, you do need to reconsider that, because the Democrat Party is not an ally to you and not an ally to your home country.
So you saw there two allies of the former president, Speaker Mike Johnson and Congressman Byron Donalds, effectively backing him up there. And I think that's the bulk of the conversations that I've had with lawmakers on the Republican side of the aisle, both in the House and in the Senate, some of them going so far as to say they probably wouldn't have said it that way, others of them outright condemning what Trump said. But by and large, they're backing him up, which I think is probably going to be the pattern that we're watching, Yamiche, over the course of the next several months until the election.
Certainly a pattern that we'll be watching. I also want to bring up something else that's happening on Capitol Hill. Senators are getting an intel briefing about the security threats posed by TikTok. The House, of course, passed last week a bill that would ban TikTok if it didn't sell, if its Chinese owners don't sell. Is there any sort of momentum in the Senate to pass this bill that could end up banning TikTok?
Momentum is a funny word here in the Senate, especially when even having momentum around something means that it's probably going to move pretty slowly. And I think that's the general mood that I found from senators today after I spoke with them when they left this classified briefing about TikTok. Some of them were saying that a lot of what they heard should be made public. Some of it might already be public in terms of the way that TikTok's algorithm can be manipulated to put forth certain messaging that might not be helpful in the United States, especially in the larger geopolitical climate. But I think the thing that I found the most interesting when it came to these senators was two things. The first, that they're not moving quickly on this. And the second is that it's not necessarily going to be as simple as just picking up the House-passed bill. They've got ideas of their own here.
Well, I'm hearing from a lot of people who aren't following politics as close as us that they're worried about TikTok. So thank you, Ali, for that reporting. Turning now to some economic news. Stocks surged today with the Dow rallying more than 400 points after the Federal Reserve's decision this afternoon to hold interest rates steady. But more importantly, the central bank reiterated its plans to cut rates 3 times before the end of the year, which could mean a major boost for investors. Fed Chair Jerome Powell cautioned that their fight against inflation has been trickier than expected, which means rates could end up going up again at some point. But for the near term, lower rates would mean lower lending costs for banks and hopefully for consumers, too. Still to come, turmoil and crisis in Haiti. I'll talk to a State Department veteran about the emergency situation and the Caribbean nation's path to stability. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Dangerous gang violence and a power vacuum continue to consume Haiti. It comes as the State Department says almost 1,600 U.S. citizens have reached out to the U.S. government to try to find a way out of the Caribbean nation. So far, the State Department has helped evacuate 30 Americans from the port city of Cap-Haïtien, and today the U.S. announced it will begin evacuation efforts out of Port-au-Prince.
Our hope is to keep these options available for American citizens who need it, and the feasibility and the assessment of that work is going to be ongoing.
Earlier this week, the White House said it was mobilizing support to help the Haitian National Police Force restore order. But the violence in Haiti is now spreading, including to more affluent areas in the capital city. Joining me now is Keith Mines. He's vice president of the Latin American program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. So thank you so much for being here. There, of course, there has been this humanitarian crisis playing out. There's also the security issues, and there's a governance problem. How do you have a new government without solving the security issues, and vice versa? How do you solve the security issues without having a working government in Haiti?
Well, that's a good question. Both of them have to go together. They have to go hand in hand. It's kind of a chicken and egg question, which comes first, security or politics. I think we're to the point where without security, this new government is not going to be able to function. So there is a need to get that security force that's been proposed by the Kenyans, led by the Kenyans, and including a number of other countries on the ground as fast as possible to restore at least a semblance of order so that the new government could have a chance of governing.
And of course, we're talking about a new government because it's been almost 10 days since Prime Minister Ali Henry has said that he's going to step down. There's now supposed to be this transitional council with a number of different political parties and members of society that have different ideologies, different personalities. What's the latest with that issue right now and the council forming?
Right. Well, they're very close. They've got, and the model they're using is one that's been used before. It's a little bit different, so it's kind of new, but it's one that's been used before to form a kind of a council of sages or a council of parties, a presidential council that would then go on to choose one of their members to be the governor of the head of state of the country. So it's not a new model, but it's a little bit different in the way that's being done. They've got 6 of the 7 main seats chosen. There was a couple that fell out that weren't going to participate, and then there's 2 observers that would be part of it as well. So 9 total. They're almost there, according to reports. And with that, they then have got a presidential council that could then take over governing from Prime Minister Henry, who presumably would then resign. And they would be the ones that would choose a new prime minister and then decide how the country is going to be governed with the presidential powers as well. And how do you think they'll have credibility as you look at that council? Well, that's one of the problems that I think they're going to have. It's a very limited number of people. It's more than what there is now, which is effectively 1. So it's a bit of an expansion, but it's not everybody. One of the ideas that's floating around would be to have a kind of a national advisory council, one step down from that, which would be another 20 people that could help to connect with the citizenry, that could help to bring in more sectors of society. There's a real suspicion among the Haitian people about this whole process and about any process, frankly. They haven't been communicating very well, the government to the people. That's another key area that's going to have to be a part of it. Yeah. But frankly, if people's lives get better, they're going to be happy with anything. So the test is going to be whether it works or not. What about the gang problem here? It's worsened in the last few days. Tell me about sort of the plan to deal with these gangs, and if there's an issue, an idea rather, of what these gangs want. Yeah, the gangs have really kind of passed from being criminal groups, which is where they evolved from 2017, when the UN pulled back a lot of its mentoring of the HNP and kind of put Haiti on the back burner. There was a void that was created that then led to the assassination of the president in 2021. And then from there, it just got worse and worse. But they've gone from really being criminal gangs that were pretty vicious because they were looking for territory from which they could kidnap and rob and extort. So it wasn't just like they wanted a corridor to run drugs. Yeah. They wanted to control territory. They've now gone to where they've been in power, frankly, in a lot of these neighborhoods for so long that they actually would like even more power. And there's talk that some of them would like to take over the country. So they've kind of gone from criminals to warlords. And I want to ask you, of course, when you look at the security issue, Kenya is now saying that they might not provide the sort of security that they were promising, even though that was a different sort of background. Could there possibly be U.S. boots on the ground if Kenya pulls out? Well, it's going to be a decision for the administration to make. I know they've tried hard to avoid that. They've wanted to have other countries leading this effort and actually doing the boots on the ground. There may come a time where there's just nothing else that would work other than the U.S. If it wasn't U.S. national forces, there might be a way for privatized security to still have the skill sets and the capacity that would be missing from this force. But it is going to have to come in kind of heavy, I think, at this point. Push back the gangs, get things restored, but also have a way forward for the gangs that isn't just fighting. They're going to need community programs, job programs. They're going to need demobilization. There's going to need to be a lot of things on the margins of the actual security mission that will be helpful to try to bring those gangs together.
And certainly buy-in from the Haitian people who are skeptical about all sorts of things, including U.S. boots on the ground. Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us. Kristen's back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.